Camping is supposed to be a break from the world. But what if it's the world trying to break into you? Voices out of nowhere, unexplainable sounds, and a photo that never should have existed. These true stories were captured by accident, and they'll make you think twice before stepping out of your tent at night. The hut was isolated in the heart of the forest, surrounded by towering trees that stood like the pillars of an ancient temple. The late afternoon light filtered through the leaves, casting elongated shadows on the ground covered in a carpet of dry leaves. The air there had a dense smell of aged wood and damp earth, an aroma that seemed laden with history, as if this place had been there long before any trails were blazed. I took a deep breath, letting the silence envelop me. It was exactly what I needed: distance from the city, the incessant cell phone notifications, the voices and noises that never stopped. Here, there was only the sound of the wind rustling the leaves and, from time to time, the crackle of the cabin's wood adjusting to the cold of the night that was beginning to fall. The structure of the hut was simple, but cozy. Tightly fitted, log walls, rustic furniture, a small kitchen with basic utensils and a fireplace in the corner of the room, whose cold ashes indicated that it had been a long time since anyone had last used it. Upstairs, a small mezzanine served as a bedroom, with a wooden bed positioned against the wall and a narrow window facing the immensity of the forest. I left my backpack on the sofa, stretched my sore shoulders from the long trip, and turned on my cell phone. No signal. Not that I was expecting another result, but seeing that screen with no connection bar made me feel even more isolated from the world outside. Maybe that was what was bothering me. The silence. It seemed too deep. Not as a simple refuge from the hustle and bustle of the city, but as something intentional, something that went on too long, without interruption. No sound of birds at dusk, no rustling of small animals in the woods, just the wind and the occasional sound of the cabin creaking. I tried to ignore the uncomfortable feeling and followed my routine. I prepared something simple to eat, organized my things, and took advantage of the last hours of light to walk around the cabin. The forest was dense, the tree trunks thick and jagged, their tops intertwined to form a dark green roof that prevented us from seeing the sky. There were no other buildings in sight, nor any sign of a well-defined road or trail. Just me, the hut, and that persistent silence. When night fell for good, I lit the fireplace. The flames cast an orange glow over the wooden walls, filling the room with soft crackles and a welcoming warmth. I took out my cell phone and scrolled through the photo gallery, revisiting images from the trip, the deserted road and the trail that led there. It had been a good day, but for some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that all that silence wasn't right, as if there was something there, just waiting for me to notice it. The second night came slowly and dragged by. The day had been peaceful. Walks in the forest, a strong coffee on the balcony, a few pages read from a book forgotten at the bottom of my backpack. The lack of connection with the outside world was a relief, and at the same time, an unsettling reminder that I was completely alone out there. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest became a huddle of living shadows. Darkness came quickly, swallowing up the space between the trees and turning the cabin into a lonely island in the middle of the black expanse. I lit the fire again and let the warmth fill the room, chasing away the growing chill of the early morning. It was strangely cold, not just because of the temperature, but because of the way it seemed to stand still, as if the air around the cabin had become stagnant. Outside, the trees were still. No wind swayed their branches. Not a leaf moved. When I went up to the bedroom, the stillness of the hut weighed on me in a different way. Every crack of the wood seemed louder. The creak of my own footsteps on the floor echoed for too long, as if I were being absorbed by something beyond the log walls. I lay down on the bed and pulled the blanket up to my chin. The mattress was firm, but comfortable. Despite the uncomfortable silence, the tiredness of the day weighed heavily on my eyes. I took my cell phone from the nightstand and slid my fingers across the screen, for no apparent reason, just to occupy my mind before going to sleep. That's when I noticed. There was a new photo in the gallery. My body went rigid. The phone trembled slightly in my hand as I touched the screen, magnifying the image. It was a picture of me, sleeping. The angle was strange. The picture was taken from above, directly above the bed, but the roof of the hut was solid wood, without any openings. My heart hammered against my chest, and my eyes scanned the image once more. My expression was serene, motionless, my arms on the blanket. Everything seemed normal at first glance, except for one detail. In the corner of the picture, near the bed, there was a shadow. It wasn't there now, but in that picture it was next to me. My fingers trembled on the screen as I zoomed in. The photo was sharp, captured at an impossible angle. From the roof of the hut, directly above me. My body was relaxed, my face partially covered by the blanket. But the most terrifying part wasn't the impossibility of the photo having been taken there. It was the shadow. In the corner of the picture, near the bed, there was a dark blur. It had no definite shape, but it was dense, present. Something was there when the picture was taken. But I was alone. My heart raced, a deafening hammering against my ribs. I sat up in bed, my eyes scanning every corner of the room. The wooden walls were the same, solid and without gaps. The ceiling, just a few meters above my head, had no opening. No camera, no gap. Just the aged wood, immovable beams supporting the roof. There was nowhere that photo could have been taken from. The air became heavy, the night chill sticking to my skin. Every fiber of my body was telling me to get out of there immediately, but my mind was trying to rationalize. Maybe it was a mistake on the cell phone, a bizarre glitch in the camera, a glitch in some old backup. Yes, maybe I had taken that photo on my own and simply forgotten about it. But why? And how? I forced myself to breathe slowly, trying to stifle the panic that was already taking root in my spine. I had to test it. With still trembling fingers, I opened the camera and pointed it upwards. I took a picture of the ceiling. No change, no anomalies. The image appeared normal, just the dark wood above my head. No shadows, no impossible angles. I swallowed dry. Something was wrong, very wrong. The silence around me seemed deeper than before, as if it had closed in on me. My eyes returned to the cell phone screen, to that damned photo. The shadow was there. And then I realized a new detail. The dark blur wasn't just next to the bed. It was closer than before. My eyes fixed on the cell phone screen. The dark blur wasn't just a defect in the image. It wasn't a fault with the camera. It was something, and now I could see another detail. In the photo, my blanket was slightly pulled to the side as if someone had leaned over me while I slept. My chest was rising and falling rapidly, air coming in and out in short hiccups. A damp chill ran down the back of my neck, spreading goosebumps all over my skin. With a sudden movement, I pushed the covers away and jumped out of bed, feeling my feet hit the wooden floor with a dull thud. I turned on all the lights in the cabin. The small lamp next to the bed, the lamp next to the armchair in the living room, the dim light in the kitchen. The room lit up with a yellowish glow, but that didn't dispel the suffocating feeling that something was wrong, that something was there. With the flashlight on my cell phone, I began to inspect everything. The ceiling, solid. No holes, no gaps, no space through which a camera could have captured that image. The walls, nothing. No gaps, no cracks, no hiding places to explain what was going on. The door, closed, locked with the iron bolt. The cold seemed to increase. I slowly turned around, looking at the room. Everything looked the same, but different at the same time. The cabin hadn't changed shape, but the air inside, the air seemed heavier. Thud echoed through the room. My heart leapt in my chest. It was coming from the stairs. The wood creaked, as if it had just borne a weight that was no longer there. With trembling fingers, I picked up my cell phone again. and went back to that photo. The shadow next to the bed, it seemed to have moved. A soft, almost imperceptible noise ran through the room, like a low, long, familiar breath. The cell phone slipped out of my hands. It wasn't the cabin that was changing. It was me who was no longer alone. The room seemed smaller, tighter, as if the very space around me was shrinking. The heavy air clung to my skin like cold damp, and even with all the lights on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving in the corners where the light couldn't reach. That damn photo. I tried to ignore it. I deleted the image from the gallery, closed my eyes, and took a deep breath. There was nothing here. It was just tiredness, a trick of the mind. Maybe somehow my own cell phone had done it all by itself. Yes, that made more sense, but my mind wouldn't accept it. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind recreated the image perfectly. The shadow next to the bed, the slightly pulled blanket, the idea that something had been there. After minutes that seemed like hours, I convinced myself to pick up my cell phone again, just to check, just to make sure everything was normal. My hand was shaking as I unlocked the screen. I opened the gallery, and then I froze. There was another photo, a new one. My stomach sank. My hands became sweaty. I touched the image, and it expanded on the screen. This time, it wasn't a picture of me sleeping. It was a picture of the cabin door. The silver handle reflected a faint glow, and the gaps between the wood showed an opaque darkness from the inside. The photo was taken outside. My eyes were burning. My heart was pounding in my throat. Someone was out there. Or worse, someone was outside. I turned suddenly, facing the door. It was still closed, locked. But that didn't calm me down. Foot by foot, I approached, trying to control my breathing. When I was just a few centimeters from the door, another detail hit me like a blow. To the chest, the photo wasn't dark. The flash from the cell phone illuminated the wood. Someone had taken it with the camera activated. Someone wanted me to see it. And then, in the suffocating silence of the hut, came the sound. Low, on the other side of the door, a breath, slow, dragging, listening, waiting. My heart was hammering. In my chest, each beat resounding like a drum in the absolute silence of the cabin. My eyes were fixed on the door, my muscles tense, as if my own body refused to move. I was no longer alone. The breathing on the other side of the wood still echoed in my mind, low, drawn out, irregular, as if something was listening. I had to react. With cautious steps, I walked into the small kitchen. I opened the drawer next to the sink and groped for the cold metal until I found a knife. It was big, heavy, and although my hand was shaking, the simple act of holding it gave me a false sense of control. I went back to the door. The silence was oppressive. I pressed my ear against the wood, holding my breath. Nothing. Not a single sound. But the air was different. The cold seemed to have infiltrated the hut, curled up in the corners, pushing against my skin as if it had a presence of its own. My hands were sweating. The handle of the knife felt slippery between my fingers, and then my cell phone vibrated. The sound made my whole body stiffen. A notification popped up on the screen. New photo added to the gallery. My stomach churned. The room spun around me, but my fingers moved on their own. I touched the screen. The gallery opened. The photo was mine. Right now, in that position, in front of the door, holding the knife. My mouth went dry. Someone was watching. Me. My chest rose and fell uncontrollably, my body vibrating with the instinct to flee. My hands began to shake so badly that I could barely hold on to my cell phone. But I knew. If I had just taken that photo, it wasn't outside. It was inside. My fingers were numb. The cell phone was still shaking in my hand, the screen illuminating my face with a cold, artificial glow. That photo couldn't exist. I was there, standing in front of the door, holding the knife exactly as I was now. But I hadn't taken that picture. My chest rose and fell rapidly, each breath short and shallow. The silence inside the hut was overwhelming, a heavy emptiness that seemed to press into my bones, as if something invisible was building up there, growing, waiting. I looked around, my eyes scanning every corner of the room. Nothing seemed different, but I felt it. A presence, a weight on my shoulders, and then an idea crossed my mind, irrational and desperate. I opened the front camera. The cell phone became a makeshift mirror. The screen reflected the image of the closed door behind me, the weathered wood, the silver handle that gleamed softly in the yellowish light of the cabin. Nothing. No shadow, no silhouette, no sign that I wasn't alone. But the moment I allowed myself to breathe, something changed. On the screen of my cell phone, the door behind me was no longer closed. It was ajar. My eyes went wide, and my throat closed in a knot of sheer terror. I turned around suddenly. The door in the real world was still closed. I looked back at the screen. On the camera, it was still open, and now there was something in the dark gap. Not a face, not a body, just a dense emptiness, too deep, as if the cabin door no longer led outside, but to a place that shouldn't exist. My hand gripped the knife tighter, but I knew there was nothing a blade could do against it. The cell phone screen flashed, and a new notification popped up. New photo added to the gallery. My trembling fingers touched the message. The new image opened in full screen. It was me. But this time, I wasn't alone. Behind me, in the photo, in the open doorway, someone was looking at me. I didn't move. My eyes were fixed on the screen of my cell phone, where that last photo was staring back at me. It was me, standing in front of the door holding the knife with shaking fingers. But behind me, in the open doorway in the picture, there was something, or someone. The figure was tall and indistinct, a blur of shadows impossible to define, but the contours suggested something humanoid. There were no visible eyes, but I knew I was being watched, that the thing could see me. The silence in the hut was no longer empty. Now he was waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I deleted the photos, turned off my cell phone, and still I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. Every crack of the wood, every shadow cast by the faint glow of the fireplace made me hold my breath. Something was with me. I sat up, in bed, knife firmly in hand, and waited for the first light of morning to come through the window. As soon as the first rays illuminated the wooden walls, I didn't hesitate. I slung my backpack over my shoulder and left the hut. The morning air seemed different, lighter. The forest, once stifling, now seemed like just a forest. I walked without looking back, refusing to give that thing any chance to pull me back. Drove nonstop to the nearest town, where I could finally breathe without feeling that invisible weight on me. I parked the car, picked up my cell phone, and unlocked the screen. The photos were still there. Panic rose up inside me. I had deleted them all. But they were still there. And at the end of the gallery, there was one last photo. One I hadn't seen before. It was a picture of me leaving the hut, taken from inside it. My fingers were numb, my eyes glued to the screen of my cell phone. The last photo, me leaving the cabin, taken from inside her. A chill went up my spine, a chill that didn't come from the car's air conditioning or the city's morning wind. It was an internal chill, a suffocating certainty, as if something was still with me. My first reaction was to delete the photo. My fingers slid over the screen quickly, as if the longer that image existed, the more power it had. I deleted them, all, but I still didn't feel free. I returned home that same afternoon. Hot bath, lights on, TV on, anything to surround me with normality, with ordinary sounds, with life around me. But the silence seemed to follow me, even in the midst of the noise. The first few nights were terrible. Every little noise in the house would startle me awake, my heart racing and my mouth dry. I forced myself to believe that it was just paranoia, that I had escaped, that it had stayed in that cabin. Then, on the fourth night, my cell phone vibrated, late at night. The screen glowed in the dark of the bedroom. New photo added to gallery. My body refused to move for an instant. Every muscle froze, as if my mind was trying to protect me from what I already knew. But my finger slid across the screen, opening the gallery. The image loaded. It was me, sleeping, taken from above. The cell phone slipped out of my hand, falling to the floor with a thud. I sat up in bed, the air trapped in my lungs. I looked up, at the ceiling. Nothing. Just like in the cabin. Nothing but the ceiling. The next morning, I formatted my cell phone. I bought a new one. New number. New account. But on the second night, the phone vibrated again. New photo added to the gallery. My trembling fingers touched the notification. The photo loaded. Me, sleeping, taken from the ceiling. The lake was beautiful. Too beautiful. Too peaceful. The surface reflected the sky in shades of gold and blue, shimmering in the late afternoon light. There were no waves, not even small ripples. Just a mirror of water so perfect that if you touched, there would be no depth, just another reality below, inverted. The hut was simple, made of dark weathered wood, small but cozy. Outside, an old deck protruded over the water, creaking gently in the cold wind. When we stepped onto it, the wood gave way slightly under our weight, as if it had been asleep for a long time and woke up only with our presence. The place was exactly what we wanted. Isolated, away from the city, away from noise, away from other people, and far from any help should we need it. We got out of the car and the silence enveloped us like a cold wave. Helena smoothed her hair and took a deep breath, looking around. No neighboring huts, no footsteps of other people, no noise apart from the occasional creak of branches in the wind. "It looks like a painting," I murmured. She smiled, hugging, her body to ward off the cold. Very different from the city, yes, different. The truth was that I was expecting to hear something. The sound of birds, the buzzing of insects, perhaps the croaking of frogs on the shore. But there was nothing. No life. Just the wind cutting across the surface of the lake and the feeling that everything there was waiting. I pushed open the cabin door. The smell of aged wood and a faint hint of the sea hit me. The place was rustic, with pine furniture and an old fireplace in the corner. I put my suitcases down next to the sofa and looked out of the window. The lake was still intact, reflecting the dark sky that was slowly forming. Helena went into the kitchen to make some tea while I took off my shoes, trying to ignore the discomfort that was growing in the back of my mind. Perhaps it was just the change of environment, the shock of absolute silence. But as night began to fall, I realized that the feeling wasn't going away. It was then that I heard the first sound. Low. Almost a distant whisper. I stopped in the middle of the room, frowning. Helena was distracted, fiddling with the kettle, so she must not have heard it. I approached the window and looked out over the lake. The silence became even denser, and for the first time that night, I felt a pressure in my chest, as if something was watching us from the opposite shore. Maybe it was just paranoia. Maybe it was tiredness. But before I closed the curtain, I was sure that something was moving in the water. Night fell quickly. The sunset reflected in the lake, once beautiful and golden, gave way to absolute blackness. The surface, which had seemed so serene at dusk, was now just a dark stain, a liquid void that stretched beyond the window. If it weren't for the faint moonlight, the lake might as well not be there anymore. The icy wind made the tree branches creak around the hut. Every now and then, the dry crackle of wood mixed with the sound of swaying leaves, creating a monotonous, hypnotic soundtrack. Helena was sitting on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, holding a mug of hot tea between her hands. The steam rose slowly, dissipating into the cold air of the room. She seemed relaxed, but I felt something different in the room. Something subtle, uncomfortable. Maybe it was just the isolation. Maybe it was the silence. I tried to focus on the book I'd brought, but my mind kept returning to the lake. My gaze drifted to the window at the slightest odd sound, as if I expected to see something out there. But there was only darkness, until Helena stirred. "Did you hear that?" She pulled back the blanket and frowned. I hesitated. The fire in the fireplace was crackling, and the wind outside was still whistling through the trees. But now, there was another sound. Low, almost imperceptible. A whisper, coming from the water. I closed the book and leaned forward, trying to listen better. But as soon as I tried to focus on the sound, it disappeared. Helena watched me for a moment, then let out a nervous laugh. "I think I'm tired." She tried to go back to watching TV, but the brightness of the screen was weak, almost irrelevant next to the darkness outside. I got up, walked over to the window and pulled the curtain aside slightly. The glass reflected my pale face in the dim light of the cabin. Outside, the lake remained inert. No waves, no movement. But I had the feeling that if I stared too long, something would stare back. I swallowed and let the curtain fall. I tried to push the thought out of my mind, but the night had only just begun. The silence of the night seemed denser than before. I tried to ignore it. I tried to convince myself that I was just tired, that my mind was amplifying the normal little sounds of nature. But as the minutes passed, the feeling that something was wrong clung to my skin like damp. The whisper that Helena had heard, I had heard it too. Now every crack of the wood, every breath of the wind, made my body alert. I got up from the sofa and walked to the cabin door, opening it slowly. The night air was chilly, laden with the smell of standing water and damp vegetation. The floor creaked under my weight as I stepped onto the aged deck. The moon reflected on the lake, creating a faint band of light on the dark surface. The waters were still intact, without a single movement. But something made me stop. A small light shone beneath the surface. I frowned. It wasn't the reflection of the moon or fireflies. They were tiny bright dots, pulsating at the bottom of the lake like submerged stars. First 2, then 5, then dozens. I blinked, trying to understand what I was seeing. Every second, they seemed to move. I squeezed my eyes shut, feeling a chill on the back of my neck. I picked up a stone from the ground and threw it into the water. Plash. The impact echoed loudly in the night. The lights disappeared instantly. I stood there waiting. The air was heavy, charged with something I couldn't explain. The lake became even darker, as if it had swallowed up any remnants of brightness. And then, absolute silence. I couldn't say how long I stood there, breathing slowly, waiting for something to happen. And that's when I heard it. My own voice. Low, hoarse, coming from inside the forest. Helena. The chill took hold of my body. I turned sharply, my gaze scanning the darkness between the trees. My heart was pounding in my chest. The forest shouldn't be calling me, but it was. And worse, it sounded exactly like me. My body was rigid, every muscle tense to the extreme. The sound of my own voice coming out of the forest still echoed in my ears, low, drawn out as if it had been ripped out of me and given back the wrong way. I took a deep breath. Maybe it had been an echo. Maybe I was tired. Maybe crack. A branch snapped deep in the woods. My skin crawled with goosebumps. I turned towards the hut and walked hurriedly, trying to ignore the feeling that someone was following me. Every step I took seemed louder than it should have been, as if the sound was being amplified by the night. When I reached the door, I looked back one last time. The forest was still dark, impenetrable. The lake, still. But the feeling that someone was there standing between the trees looking at me wouldn't go away. I went inside and closed the door more tightly than necessary. Helena looked at me confused. "What's wrong?" I blinked a few times, trying to look normal. "It's nothing, just cold." She didn't seem to believe me, but she didn't insist. She just draped the blanket over her shoulders and went back to staring at the fireplace. The feeling that something was wrong didn't leave me. I tried to sleep, but my body refused to relax. Every few minutes, my mind searched for sounds in the darkness, waiting for that whisper to return. And then, at around 3 in the morning, it came again. This time it wasn't coming from the forest. It came from the water. The sound was low, slurred, like voices talking secretly just below the surface. Stood up slowly, feeling the cold ground beneath my bare feet. I walked over to the window and pulled the curtain just enough to peek out. The water was moving. Small eddies formed circles, even without wind, as if something just below the surface was about to emerge. My stomach sank. I closed the curtain immediately. That night, the whispers didn't stop, and when the sun rose, we found wet footprints all around the hut. They led straight to the door. The morning came slowly, dragging on. The sky was gray, the air dense and humid, charged with the feeling that the night was not yet completely over. I woke up breathing heavily, feeling a strange weight on my chest, as if something had been watching me sleep. Helena was already up, standing by the cabin door. The blanket was slipping off her shoulders, her arms crossed over her body as if she were trying to protect herself from the cold. "What's wrong?" My voice came out huskier than usual. She didn't answer. She just pointed at the floor, her eyes wide. I followed her gaze and my blood ran cold. There were wet footprints on the balcony, small ones, irregular, as if they had been made by human feet, but with the wrong contours. They weren't coming from inside the hut, nor were they heading towards the lake. They came from the lake, and they stopped right in front of the door. I swallowed, trying to process what I was seeing. My mind searched for a logical explanation. Maybe they were our footprints from last night. But we knew it wasn't. They weren't ours. Helena took a step back, her lips trembling. Someone had been here, but that was the wrong part. The footprints weren't scattered at random. They didn't come from the forest. They came straight from the lake, as if something had come out of the water and stood there, watching us through the door all night. I did what anyone would do. I opened the door at once, ready to catch any intruder in the act. But there was nothing. The forest was silent. The lake was still. No sound of running footsteps. No footprints on the trail. But the wet footprints were there, completely formed, as if whoever had made them didn't need to leave. Helena squeezed my hand, and I felt her tremble. The lake wasn't just a strange place. It was reacting to our presence, and it wanted us to know it. The silence was heavy. Helena and I stood on the balcony, staring at those impossible footprints. The water still shone motionless under the cloudy sky, like a black mirror, concealing anything below its surface. The decision to leave came without us having to speak. It didn't matter if we were exaggerating. It didn't matter if, rationally, none of it made sense. Something in that lake didn't want us to stay there. We went back inside and started packing our things. Helena hastily folded the clothes, throwing them into the suitcase without bothering to organize them. I went into the kitchen to get the car key, which I had left on the table the night before. As soon as I reached out to take it, my body froze. The key was there, but something was wrong. The metal glinted in the dim morning light. It was damp. Not just damp, soaking wet, as if it had been dipped in water moments before. Small fillets ran down the wood of the table, dripping gently onto the floor. I swallowed and hesitantly touched the key ring. The cold that ran through my fingers was unusual. It was a deep chill, the kind of temperature you feel inside your bones. And then I saw what was next to the key. A note. A small piece of crumpled paper, as if it had been folded and unfolded several times. The ink was smudged, the letters shaky, but you could read it clearly. Water always gives back what is hers. My heart hammered against my chest. I put the paper down and looked around, as if I expected to find someone hiding inside the hut, but there was no one. Helena appeared in the kitchen doorway, confused by my expression. "What's wrong?" "We need to leave. Now." I showed her the wet key and the note. Her face turned pale, her lower lip trembling slightly. "This was in here," she whispered. "That means someone..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The water hadn't taken the key. Someone had, or worse, someone brought it back. We tightened our bags and hurried out, locking the cabin behind us. But before we got into the car, a shiver ran up my spine. The lake water was no longer still. Gentle ripples spread across the surface as if something was rising. Something was watching us from there. And for the first time, I had the impression that the lake was breathing. The suitcases were thrown onto the back seat. My fingers trembled as I tried to turn the key in the ignition. The cold that came from the metal still burned my fingers, but I ignored it. We had to get out of there. Helena stared at the lake, unblinking. Her lips were pale. "What's wrong?" I asked, squeezing her leg. She pointed. I followed her gaze and my stomach sank. The lake was closer. The deck, which used to be meters away, now began where the balcony ended. It was as if the water had advanced during the night, swallowing up the land, slowly approaching us. The ripples were still there, getting bigger and bigger. Something below the surface was moving, something big. Helena let out a low, hoarse sound, almost a sob, and then we heard it. "Helena." It was my voice, but I hadn't said anything. The sound was coming from the lake. I gripped the steering wheel, my chest tight. Helena covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. The voice repeated itself, coming from somewhere deep in the water like a distorted echo. "Helena, come here." My own voice, but wrong, wet, drowned. The air became thicker, filled with humidity. My body was cold. Every inch of my skin shivered. The lake was calling us. Helena grabbed my arm. "Start the car. Now!" I turned the key in the ignition. Nothing. The engine coughed, died, choked. The dashboard flashed, and then everything went out. "No, no, no!" I slammed my foot on the accelerator, trying again. Another wave formed on the lake. Something emerged. Lights. The same flashing lights I saw the night before. But now, there were lots of them, little golden dots under the surface like eyes. Buried in the water, watching, and then something came out. A hand. Not a human hand. A pale, enlarged thing with fingers too long and thin to be normal. It rose slowly from the water, its fingers crisping against the air. The second hand came soon after, and then the face began to emerge. My throat closed up. Helena pulled hard on my arm, but I couldn't move. What was coming out of the lake wasn't just one thing. It was many. Dark, slender figures, moving slowly. The chin of one of them snapped sideways, opening an impossibly large mouth. And then they all spoke at once. "You came on the wrong night." The voices were ours. Mine. Helena's. But multiplied, distorted, coming from the wrong throats. The lake wasn't a lake. It was an open mouth, and it was waiting for us. Helena screamed. I slammed my hands on the ignition once more. The engine roared. I stepped on the accelerator, and then we took off. The car sped down the dirt road, shaking with speed. The engine roared, the tires kicked up dust, and I kept my foot firmly on the accelerator. The silence inside the car was absolute, except for Helena's irregular breathing and the deafening beating of my own heart. Don't look back. That was the only thing on my mind. I knew the lake was there, watching us, waiting for us to have the audacity to look. But we didn't. We just kept going. The trees passed like shadows around us, the sky grayed by the morning mist. I didn't know how long we had been driving, but it seemed that the road stretched on endlessly, keeping us trapped between the forest and the unknown. Finally, after what seemed like hours, we spotted the entrance to the nearest town. Small lampposts flashed on the side of the road, and a few simple houses appeared in the distance. Helena began to cry softly, her shoulders shaking, but she didn't make a sound. She just let the tears run down her face. That's when the radio squawked, a low, scratchy static sound. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard that my knuckles turned white. I looked at Helena. She didn't move a muscle, but I saw the terror leaking from her eyes. The static became more intense, as if something was trying to get out, and then a voice. Helena's voice. "Come home." I stopped the car abruptly. The screeching continued, and then once again, "Come home." Helena put her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. But I couldn't breathe, because I knew. She hadn't said that. Her lips hadn't even moved. And then the radio stopped. Absolute silence. I ripped the radio out of the dashboard and threw it in the back seat, as if that would take our minds off what had happened. I shifted into gear and accelerated again. Helena stared ahead, paralyzed, her eyes glazed over. Neither of us said anything else for the rest of the way. But I knew it. The lake would never let us go completely. We never talked about that night. Going home didn't bring us peace. The lake may have been left behind, but the feeling that it was still with us never completely disappeared. For the first few days, we tried to move on. Helena was silent most of the time. She would stop in the middle of some activity and simply stare into nothingness, as if she was listening to something I couldn't hear. I tried to pretend that everything was normal. I tried to convince myself that we were safe. But then the little things started. The tap dripping in the middle of the night. A subtle rhythmic sound, as if someone was stirring the water with their fingers. The radio in the living room turning itself on, static squeaking in the dark, and the footsteps. At first, I thought it was all in my head, but one morning when I opened the door to get the newspaper, I saw wet footprints on the balcony floor. Small, deformed, like the ones we found in the hut. I wanted to believe it was a coincidence, that the rain had left stains on the floor. But Helena saw it too, and she didn't say anything. She just closed the door slowly and locked it twice. The nightmares came later. She dreamt of water, always about water. The lake stretching out like an open mouth, the little lights pulsing at the bottom. And the voices, my voice, Helena's, calling to each other, distorted, wrong. One night, Helena woke up panting. Her hands were cold, her eyes wide. I saw it, my skin crawled. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. The next night I went to the bathroom, trying to ward off sleep with cold water on my face. I closed my eyes for a second, feeling my breathing slow and heavy. When I raised my head, I saw my reflection, and behind me, in the darkness of the corridor, small lights were flashing. I didn't turn around. I just closed my eyes and waited. The lake hadn't forgotten us, and sooner or later it will call us back. The surrounding forest was a dark ocean, its trees swaying slightly to the rhythm of the wind that snaked between the branches. The only source of light was the fire that crackled in the center of our camp, drawing long, wavering shadows on the twisted trunks. The smell of burning wood mingled with the damp aroma of the earth, creating a woody, earthy scent that seemed to seep into the skin. Above us, the sky stretched out in a black blanket, studded with stars that twinkled like shards of glass scattered across the firmament. It had been a long, exhausting walk, but it had been worth it. We were far from any trace of civilization. No cell phone signal, no incessant bustle of the city, just us and the vastness of the forest, granting us a rare absolute silence. However, it wasn't a dead silence. On the contrary, the forest was alive. Insects murmured somewhere among the foliage, a continuous sound that filled the gaps in the night. We heard the occasional rustle of small animals moving between the bushes, and the wind sometimes whispered indecipherable words between the leaves. We were gathered around the fire, chatting and laughing after an exhausting day. The stories flowed, easily, some real, others exaggerated, shaped by the environment. Ethan, sitting on the fallen log we had improvised as a bench, gesticulated excitedly as he told a horror story. A cliché about a ghostly woodcutter who wandered the forest on moonless nights. No one really believed it, but everyone listened attentively, letting themselves be carried away by the atmosphere. Next to me, Claire snuggled into her sleeping bag, rubbing her arms to ward off the chill that crept in as the night wore on. "I love this kind of isolation," she said, looking around with a faint smile. "It makes it seem like the world outside doesn't even exist." And it was true. There, under the open sky, surrounded by dense forest and without a trace of technology, there was just us and nature. The darkness seemed to swallow us into its womb, and the fire was our only link to warmth and safety. Had we known what awaited us, we might have put out that fire and left before the night deepened. The conversation around the fire flowed naturally, alternating between muffled laughter and stories told in dramatic tones, the fire crackling as if it were another participant in the circle. The warmth of the flames against the cold forest air made everything even cozier, and for a moment it seemed like that night would be just that, a good camp, a good group of friends, a good memory to keep. But then something changed. It wasn't abrupt or obvious. It was like a subtle mistake in an impeccable painting, something you only notice when you look at it long enough. The wind, which had previously danced between the trees, suddenly ceased, leaving a strange emptiness in the air. The insects, which until then had formed a constant sound background, all fell silent at once, as if they had sensed an invisible presence hanging around them. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. It was Claire who noticed first. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing beyond the fire, as if trying to identify something in the darkness. "Did you hear that?" The rest of the group fell silent, exchanging quick glances. Nothing but the occasional rustle of moving leaves. "I heard my name," she said hesitantly, her voice almost lost in the surrounding silence. Everyone looked at each other. Ethan laughed, but it came out shaky, full of nervousness. "Are you kidding?" "No," Claire insisted, now turning fully towards the darkness, her shoulders tense. "I swear. Someone called me." Before we could react, the sound came again. "Claire." The sound came from the forest, low, almost whispered, but unmistakable. It was her name. But there was something wrong. The voice didn't sound right. It was as if someone was trying to imitate a human tone without really understanding how words work, as if the vocal cords were artificial, the timbre slightly distorted, without the natural cadence of a real voice. Claire stood up abruptly, her eyes fixed in the direction the sound had come from. "Is anyone there?" Her voice sounded firmer than I expected. No reply. Just a thick, oppressive silence. Then again, "Claire." The same wrong intonation, the same attempt to emulate something that sounded human, but failed in the details. As if a broken echo were trying to repeat a call without really understanding what it meant. "I'll see what it is," Claire muttered, already taking a step forward. "What? No!" I reached for her wrist, before she could leave the circle lit by the fire. The rest of the group stood up at almost the same time. Ethan frowned, looking into the darkness with suspicion. "It could be someone playing a trick," he said, his attempt to sound rational not hiding the unease in his voice. "Or it could be someone who needs help," Claire retorted, trying to break free of my grip. But something in my stomach churned in a way I couldn't explain. It was instinctive, primal. The voice in the forest didn't sound like something we should follow. The silence lengthened. The forest, immense and unfathomable, seemed to watch, waiting for us to make a move. Then, as if realizing that we weren't going to it, the voice disappeared, and the wind blew again. The wind blew again, but normality didn't return with it. The forest still seemed wrong, as if something invisible was sneaking between the trees, watching us, waiting. The fire crackled in the center, but its light seemed too weak to dispel the darkness that surrounded us. Claire didn't sit back down. She kept her gaze fixed in the direction from which the voice had come, the muscles in her arms tense, as if fighting an internal impulse that insisted on drawing her into the forest. "There's someone there," she insisted, her voice low, but laden with conviction. Ethan shook his head, crossing his arms. "There isn't, Claire. That wasn't a normal voice." She opened her mouth to reply but was interrupted. "Claire." This time, the voice didn't come from so far away. We froze. The sound was subtle, but impossible to ignore. The same wrong intonation, the same lack of naturalness, only now. Closer. Claire took a hesitant step forward. "No!" I squeezed her wrist, pulling her back before she left the circle lit by the fire. Ethan stood up beside me. "That's not normal." but Claire didn't. Look convinced. Her breathing was fast and her eyes shone with a restlessness that made me even more nervous. It could be someone lost, she argued, trying to get loose. Listen to that voice, I retorted, bringing my face closer to hers so that she could hear me clearly. Do you really think this is someone? Silence enveloped us, thick with expectation. Then, before anyone could say anything else, something happened that made every hair on my body stand on end. A dry crack. It came from the trees in front of us, like a branch breaking under a weight. Instinctively turned around, and that's when I saw it. At the edge of the firelight, where the dimness devoured the contours of the trees, something moved. Not an animal, not a person. It was just a shadow sneaking between the trunks, but its movement was wrong. It wasn't a step or a crawl, but a slow glide, something that seemed to imitate human movement without really understanding how a body should move. The tension hit us like silent thunder. Get back, whispered Ethan, his face pale in the firelight. Claire didn't move. Her eyes were wide open, fixed on the gloom that engulfed the creature, if it could be called that. Silence returned. An overwhelming emptiness, where the wind, the insects, and even the fire seemed to hold their breath. And then, Claire, the voice now came from inside our camp. We all turned at once. Nothing, but we knew it was there. And now it was no longer calling us from the forest. It was among us. The silence around us was alive. Not that natural silence of the forest, where small noises mingle with the night breeze, but an absolute, suffocating emptiness. There were no crickets, no owls, not even the rustle of leaves, just the fire, crackling softly, the dry sound of embers popping, filling a space that for some reason seemed wrong. No one was talking. Claire had sat down again, her knees folded against her chest, hugging her own legs, her gaze lost in the hypnotic dance of the flames. Ethan was holding a stick and twirling it between his fingers restlessly, his eyes scanning the surrounding darkness as if he expected to see something moving among the trees. Time seemed to have slowed down. Every second dragged by with a weight that shouldn't have been there. It's making me nervous, Julia murmured, her voice almost a whisper. I understood what she meant. The air itself seemed thicker, charged with something we couldn't name, but we could feel it. If it's someone who needs help, Claire suggested, but without the same conviction as before. Ethan denied it with a nod, his expression hard. It wasn't a normal voice, he muttered. You heard it. It was wrong. Like it was broken. I had no words to describe the sensation of hearing that sound. It was an attempt at speech, but without soul, without human warmth. Something that sounded like a distorted echo of something that might once have been real, but was now just an empty imitation. Then we heard it. A faint noise, small but audible. A dry crack coming from the trees. We all froze. Another snap, and another. But it wasn't just the sound of branches breaking. It was cadenced, rhythmic, as if something was surrounding us, treading carefully, testing the group's reaction. My throat went dry. Stay close to the fire, I muttered, my voice coming out lower than I had intended. Ethan took out a flashlight and pointed it in the direction of the sound. The beam of light stretched between the trees, illuminating twisted trunks and the low mist that spread across the ground. But there was nothing. The silence returned, thick as a dense fog. And then, from the other side of the camp, in the opposite direction of the light, we heard it. A whisper. Low, almost imperceptible. But it wasn't just a random sound. It was a laugh. Short, quick, and it sounded exactly like Claire's laugh. The laughter died away as quickly as it had come, leaving behind a vacuum of silence that was even more terrifying. Claire cringed, pulling the hood of her sweatshirt over her head, her eyes wide. Ethan held the flashlight tighter, his knuckles whitish. Julia covered her mouth with her hands, as if trying to hold back a sob of dread. I wanted to say something, anything that would bring a spark of rationality to the situation, but nothing seemed to be enough. There was no way to explain it. That had been Claire's voice, Claire's laugh. But she hadn't laughed. None of us had. The fire, once warm and comforting, seemed too fragile in the face of the dark immensity that surrounded us. "This isn't normal," Ethan muttered, breaking the silence. No one disagreed. The fear was palpable, an almost physical presence crawling between us. And worst of all was the feeling that something was studying us. Dawn came, and one by one, we gave up trying to disguise the tension. We decided to go to sleep, or at least pretend we could. But no one really wanted to be alone, so we piled our sleeping bags inside the largest tent, the thin tarpaulin being our only barrier against whatever was outside. For a while, everything was quiet. Just the wind blowing against the tent, everyone's breathing shallow. The zippers closed as tightly as possible, as if that would protect us. Then it came again, low, distant. Ethan. He sat up in a jolt, making me raise my face at the same moment. Claire and Julia also woke up, their eyes large in the dimness of the tent. Julia. The sound crept through the air, close but coming from all sides. Michael. It was my voice. I felt a shiver run up my spine like pure ice, my chest tightening in a mixture of panic and disbelief. It was my voice. But it wasn't me. She continued. Claire. The tone was almost perfect, but subtly wrong. As if every intonation was slightly off, the pauses a little unnatural, like a distorted recording trying to adjust itself to perfection. The four of us sat, terrified, staring at each other in the dim light of the lantern. The voice was calling us, and then it stopped. But the terror didn't go away, because the instant the silence took over again, a new sound came. Footsteps, heavy footsteps on the wet earth. Moving, around the hut, stopping and then continuing. I held my breath. Claire put her hands to her mouth, stifling a sob. Outside in the darkness, something was circling us, and now it knew our names. The footsteps continued, sometimes slow, dragging, as if something was sliding across the earth around the hut. At other times fast and dry, breaking branches, stepping on dead leaves. The rhythm didn't make sense, it wasn't natural. Something was playing with us, testing us. I felt my breath catch in my throat, my skin covered in a thin layer of cold sweat. Claire shivered beside me, her gaze fixed on the thin canvas of the tent, expecting something to push through the fabric. At any moment, some dark silhouette to protrude from the outside. This can't be real," Ethan muttered, his voice hoarse, his fingers gripping the flashlight tightly. "What if it's an animal?" Julia suggested, in a whisper that betrayed her own disbelief. "A predator, trying to lure us in?" No one answered. It was an attempt to rationalize what couldn't be explained, but we knew it wasn't an animal. It wasn't human. It wasn't something that belonged here. Claire's breathing quickened when a light scratch ran across the tent canvas outside, like long fingernails testing the fabric, experimenting with its fragility. "This has to stop," I hissed, trying to sound firmer than I really was. But no one moved. We were paralyzed, like cornered prey, listening to the predator on the prowl. Time passed in a strange, undefined way. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. The sound of footsteps diminished until only silence remained. It was Ethan who broke the stillness. He picked up the flashlight and took a deep breath. "If we stay here, we'll go mad." I hesitated, but I knew he was right. We needed to see, to understand. We needed to get out. With trembling fingers, I slowly unzipped the tent, the metallic sound seeming deafening in the midst of the oppressive silence. The light from the lantern swept across the ground. The early morning chill touched my skin. Nothing. The camp was intact. No broken branches, no clear mark that anyone or anything had been there. But the feeling still weighed on us. Something had been there. Then Julia swallowed. "Look." She pointed to the ground near the campfire. Footprints. Fresh, damp, marked in the soft earth of the forest. But they weren't normal footprints. They weren't those of an animal. They were the footprints of all of us. My chest tightened. I recognized the imprint of my own sneakers, the outline of Ethan's boots, Claire's small footprints. But none of us had been there that night. So who had left those marks? The wind blew through the trees, and for a brief second, I thought I heard it. Our own laughter, echoing in the forest, laughing at us. The footprints were there, undeniable. The marks of each of us imprinted on the damp ground around the campfire, as if we had walked in circles during the night. But no one came out of the hut. Fear paralyzed us. Ethan swallowed and turned the flashlight around the camp. Nothing. Just darkness, the intense cold of dawn, and that oppressive feeling that we were being watched. "It'll be dawn in a few hours," I said, trying to control my panic. "We'll leave as soon as the sun comes up." Nobody objected. It was settled. We wouldn't sleep anymore. We'd just hold out until the first ray of light. But something was wrong. Time was ticking away. Every minute seemed to drag on as if we were trapped inside an infinite dawn. The cold was biting. Much colder than it should be for this time of year. I looked at the clock every few minutes, but the hands barely seemed to move. Julia was shivering. I don't know if from cold or fear. Claire was cowering by the fire, her eyes wide. Ethan held the lantern tightly, the light shaking as his fingers sweated. "It was supposed to be getting light," he whispered. And then we realized the sky was too dark. It must have been almost dawn, but there wasn't a hint of blue, no light appearing on the horizon. It was as if the night had refused to go away, and then, when we looked around, the forest was no longer the same. The once leafy trees were twisted, their long, dry branches stretched out like hands trying to reach us. The mist crawled along the ground like pale fingers, tangling itself between our legs. Everything seemed distorted, out of place. I knew at that moment that we were trapped. The voice came again, but this time it didn't call out. It was right behind, us, low, hoarse, a flawed copy of our own intonation, as if something was trying to mold itself to us. "You let me in." The heat fled from my body. The fear was now absolute. And then something touched my shoulder. The touch on my shoulder was cold. Wrong. It wasn't a human hand. It was something dry, bony, the fingers too long, as if they had grown just to reach. I didn't think. My body reacted. Before my mind could process it, I ran. The others did the same. Fear propelled us without us needing a plan or even a word of command. We just ran. The branches tore at our skin. The uneven ground made every step difficult, but we didn't look back. The air seemed dense, sticky, the smell of the forest wrong. There was no damp scent of earth, no freshness of dew, nothing. It was as if we were running through something that only looked like a forest but wasn't one, and that's when Claire realized. "The trail, it's not here." Her scream came in between quickened breaths. She was right. The dirt track we had followed, to get there, no longer existed. There were only deformed trees around us, twisted at impossible angles, their long branches like outstretched arms. And even worse, the leaves didn't move. The wind blew, but they didn't move. The panic hit harder. We didn't know where we were going. We didn't know if there was still a way out of there. It was Ethan who saw it first. He stopped abruptly, his eyes wide, his breath caught in his throat. We turned to follow his gaze, and we saw it, our own camp, exactly as we had left it. The fire was still burning, crackling gently, but something was wrong. The tents were open, the sleeping bags empty. Everything seemed untouched, and then we realized the worst part. There were people around the campfire. We were sitting there, motionless, our eyes fixed on the fire. They were our own bodies. Same clothes, the same backpacks thrown to the side, the same empty expression, staring at us. And then they smiled. The world around us seemed stuck in an impossible loop. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows over the earth. The wind blew, but nothing moved. The smell of burning wood was the same as before, as if no time had passed. But the worst thing was them, us, standing around the fire, sitting exactly where we should have been, Our faces illuminated by the flames, our clothes identical, every detail perfect. But there was something missing. That wasn't us. Not completely. The eyes were too deep, the expressions immobile, like unfinished dolls trying to imitate humanity. But what took my breath away was the smile, slow, controlled, as if every muscle was being taught to move for the first time. Claire stifled a scream, her fingers gripping my arm tightly. Julia covered her mouth, taking a step back as if she wanted to disappear. Ethan was pale, his eyes wide, his breath caught in short, quick sobs. And then it got worse. Because I didn't remember coming back. None of us did. We didn't remember sitting there. We didn't remember going back to camp. We didn't remember lighting the fire again. But there we were nonetheless. The mist was creeping over the ground, thicker, denser, as if it wanted to trap us there. The shadows of the trees seemed to bend, to come closer, to lean over us. And that's when we heard it again. The call. Only now, it was no longer distant. Now it was inside our heads. My own name whispered inside my skull, reverberating as if my mind were no longer my own. The smiles of the others, our others, widened, each tooth exposed as if they were getting used to the shape they had stolen. And then they spoke. Not a voice, not an imitation. All of us, at the same time. You never left. The fire flickered, the flames flickered for a second, and the next instant, we were sitting around it, just like before.